Welcome to the entrustED podcast. Today's episode is all about saints and survivors, and you're probably thinking, what in the world does that mean? Well, let me give you a sneak peek. You know, as a leader, it's easy to be a good doctor in a well town, which means you can't fight every fight. And if you're walking around with a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail. And in the words of the late, great Kenny Rogers, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. You can win a battle and potentially lose the whole war. Saints are in large part, last time I checked, dead, but they're known for standing their ground on the hill that they did die on. But if you're a survivor, then you have to fight another day. So most saints are no longer with us. And was their cause right? Sure. But you can be dead right. But you won't be around to fight the next day. And that's why I say, if you throw your Sunday punch every day, what in the world are you going to do on Sunday? In other words, pick your battles wisely. Don't make big decisions when you're sick, when you're tired, when you're angry, or when you're lonely. And for heaven's sake, don't drink and sin over a weekend, because the sun will come up on Monday morning. Our guest today is Ken Ciancio, and Ken has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the political arena, and he has lived a lot of his life serving his community and in the public eye. He also spent over 30 years as a local businessman, and one thing I really admire about him is he's unshakable in a storm. He's thoughtful, he anticipates politically what's coming down the road, and he is strategic. And I had the pleasure of working with Ken when he was on my school board, and especially when he was my school board president. Let me tell you how small the world really is. When I was a young administrator, Ken's father, Don Ciancio Sr., was on the school board that hired me. So I guess we can blame Ken. Fast forward several years, I was superintendent and Ken was my school board president. Currently, Ken's still active in the community and is serving on a local fire board, and he just helped his local school district pass the largest bond election in its history. He's still very active in state and local politics and is no stranger to running for office and passing elections. He's truly a servant leader. One of the things I remember most about Ken is I would call him up and I would say, "Ken, I need your help on this," and he would always respond, "Whatever you need, Pam." I had hands down the best school board to go through the pandemic with. He's the winner of a very prestigious award called the McGuffey Award, which honors school board members for demonstrating outstanding leadership in the state of Colorado. And he was also on the 2020 School Board of the Year in the state of Colorado. So welcome, Ken. I'm so glad you're here and you're taking your time to be with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Swanson. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Well, Ken, I think that you're no stranger to representing the community. And we all wear a lot of different hats. But talk about some of those hats that you've worn over your lifetime of service, really, because you grew up in a family that had a lot of community service. And for people who are listening, these are folks who we hope are either aspiring to be leaders in their communities and schools, or maybe they already are and they're thinking about that next step in their leadership journey. But just talk about your community roles and service.
Well, always been involved somehow in local politics for sure. I remember as a kid, I had to have been 8, 10, 11, 12 years old, and my dad took me to walk neighborhoods for Pat Reel, at the time running for county assessor. Bobo, Pat Reel, he was a relative. And I remember walking in Commerce City neighborhoods, handing out material way back. And then in the 70s, when Bob Landgraf ran for school board, 77, 78, he would take a bunch of this. He was a coach also, so he took his baseball team, and we would hand out material neighborhood to neighborhood for him to be elected to the school board back in 78. And so it was just a progression, always seemed to be involved. Then later, through the Adams County Democratic Party, got involved a little more heavily. and Adams County Foundation have been involved there. We give money away to local groups, so I stay involved that way, and you get to hear about people who turn in requests, what the needs are in the county. So you kind of keep your ear close to the ground. And then, of course, Adams County Fire. I think I was elected back in 2008 or 10 to that, and I've been on that for 14 years. We just hired a new chief, and then, of course, the school board, which was probably the best experience of all. I took over from Mr. Landgraf in, I think, 2012.
Yeah,
something
I think
like
is
that.
Yeah, 12 or 13.
And
I think the fall.
Served 10 years or so.
Yeah,
and so it's just been a wonderful one. Never left the neighborhood. Even went to college. Grew up in Westminster Public Schools, District 50 at the time. Went to FM Day and Scott Carpenter and Ranham, and then went to college not very far down the road. Stayed in the district, although skirting the lines of Denver, but to Regis. So really, I've never left the community. Always
been in
involved.
The metro area. So it was just a natural progression because your whole family was involved, and really, it was all about giving back. I think to the community,
certainly.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really the key.
Yeah. So what joy have you found in kind of following in your dad's footsteps? And we're going to get to the tough spots of leadership and all this too, but what's the joy as you look back now and reflect on a lot of this stuff?
Well, at the moment, sometimes there's not a lot of joy. As you know, we've been through, especially with the pandemic and everything in the last 10 years on the school board, there was lots of ups and downs, more ups than downs because of your leadership. But when you look back, what a wonderful time where you can jump into the community and help a school and help the kids. And it's, in hindsight, the joys are far greater than anything that it would be not a joy.
Yeah, when you're right in the middle of it sometimes and in the thick of things.
Absolutely.
That feels
a lot of
rough.
weight on your shoulders.
A lot of pressure, a lot of weight on your shoulders. Sometimes as a leader, you can't see an immediate reward at all. And it does take years down the road before you see part of that. And I think when we're going through it, I can't stress enough for anyone in a leadership role who already knows this or people aspiring to this, you have to have kind of a thick skin. You have to know that you have to have courage in your heart. Mm-hmm. And not be afraid to leave. I think sometimes people look for permission to lead. But can you think of those times when, even when we served together, where we had to have a lot of courage in those roles and in public eye?
How many do you want to choose? I mean, the biggest, of course, was the fight against the CDE or State Board of Education. That was the biggest, where you needed you needed courage and you needed encouragement. I mean, from the superintendent and the board, you had to encourage each other. Hey, it's the right fight. We're in it. Just stay encouraged and fight and fight and fight. So that was huge. And then COVID, the same thing. Again, it's be encouraged. It's the right fight. We know we're doing the right thing. We're getting our kids back in school before anybody else. We're getting rid of the masks before those very tough decisions. Your leadership, those very tough decisions, but encourage each other. And we made the right decisions. In hindsight, we were the leaders in that, in getting back from COVID. We did the right thing.
Yeah, I think we really saw that play out a year or so after the pandemic, when all of a sudden the test scores were coming in, and we recognized that had we not gone back earlier,
right,
our kids would have had a tremendous generational gap.
And we fought different things than COVID. I mean, we were fighting COVID too, but just to make of our district, we had many other battles that led to those lower test scores, and we were fighting many fronts. COVID was just the thing that kept the kids out of school. Yeah,
it was. And we realized very quickly that even with remote learning and every, student had a laptop and all of that, a lot of our kids' families were first responders and they weren't home. And
Right.
so trying to do remote learning,
That's right.
a lot of times the little guys were at home by themselves.
But we were one-to-one technology. We were first to go. We were able to flip the switch to remote learning quicker than anybody else, I think. Or we probably did it better than anyone else. But you're right. The parents were on the front line.
Yeah.
Cleaning the school buildings or cooking or the makeup of our district. We were frontline people. And the kids were by themselves, flipping the switch on their own to remote learning, and did a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's a hard thing when you're trying to do the right thing as a leader, and you take criticism for it, but you're not in just the here and now. You can see and anticipate what's coming down the pike. I know you did a lot of work just as a board member with other board members to help us all keep our wagons generally heading west, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that time frame and what that was like?
You think about it with COVID, you had part of our district, part of the state, part of our leadership at the time, not in the school district, but outside. They would have preferred to stay at home and remote learning for a year or longer. And we kind of had to pull together and read our community. Our community was telling us they wanted to go back.
Yeah,
we kind of pushed them a little bit on it, but once we told them, here's what you're fighting, we got to get back. They agreed. The community was with us, but other communities weren't. We were fighting a whole different fight there. That was something.
Yeah, when you're the lone wolf in the woods and everybody else is doing something different, that's a little bit of peer pressure, especially with elected officials, I would imagine.
Those back in the day, Max and I would talk about those stories at King Soopers where you'd run into that family or that parent that would give you an earful. And you're right. We were lucky to have you gave us the vision. You kind of prodded the board. This is what is best for the kids. And then the board kind of fought it at the grocery store. We fought it in the community, but you pushed us in that direction.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we would have got there quicker. We wouldn't have got, you pushed us to get there quicker. And that was the right decision. In hindsight, that was very much the right decision.
I think we talked a lot when we served together as a management team. And we all know that nothing gets done by a lone ranger in terms of leadership or moving an organization. A team is very important. Talk about the relationships there and how we built team on our board and superintendent and senior staff during those times, because I think people are listening, not just hopefully in Colorado, but across the country, who are looking for ways to build that level of collaboration.
We had a good team. We had a really good team, I think. For one, we trusted the superintendent. We trusted you. You trusted the board. You over-communicated with the board. And I think for any new superintendent, I would say that's probably the biggest thing. You can't over-communicate. It's so important on the digest and those. We knew everything. The board wasn't surprised, and you weren't surprised. And more importantly, then go back to our operations agreement. That it was how each board member treated each other, how each board member treated you, how you treated the board, how we communicated with each other, and then how we communicated with if a resident or a citizen wanted to contact you or the board. Here's how we disseminated the information. That board operational agreement we have shared many, many times with many, many people, I think all over the country.
Yeah.
And it's been, I'd hang our hat on that.
Yeah. Those operating agreements weren't just one and done either with the board. I remember we would bring those out a few times a year.
Whenever you needed to spank a board member's hand in an easy way, that was the way to do it. Well, you would just happen to say, well, let's bring those board operation agreements out just to remind everyone. And that was really your way of saying, now someone is pushing the envelope a little too far.
Well, I think, they certainly weren't used as a stick by either one of us.
No.
And they were developed by all the people at the table. But all of us are human, and we're going to step in it once in a while, right? And so I think having some kind of common agreement about how we're going to treat each other and how we're going to act as the hierarchy at the top of that hierarchy in an organizational structure matters a lot, because we had to set the tone for how we wanted everybody else to interact and treat each other.
I mean, you look at other boards, and of course, when you talk about, you look at the Denver School Board, that's a whole different animal, but they don't communicate well with each other, and at times, they don't respect each other at times. It's much more political. But you remember why we had to bring those operation agreements?
Oh, yeah.
We kind of had a couple of board members not fighting, but kind of just kicking each other a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that was your idea to bring it, to come up with this agreement. And we all signed off on it. And it worked. Heck, it worked for 10 years, and I'm sure it's still working today.
Well, I think one thing that was important is, even though that was a board operational agreement, superintendent and team were certainly involved in that. But I thought one thing you did that was very, very good, and it's about making things public. The board didn't agree to anything like that, even though there was no decision that was needing to be made by law or anything. But you would bring those out at a board meeting, a public meeting, and say, hey, this is how we plan to work with each other.
Right.
And that was powerful because it was on full display.
We let everyone know in public, and there was a historical marker every year we did it. And you're right. This is how we operate. We let everyone know. And I think to your team, from your leadership, but even down below into the teachers and into the schools, that was important. They needed to see that.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can expect things as leaders to happen with people we work with or supervise if we're not willing to walk that talk ourselves.
100% agree.
That integrity really matters. You mentioned maybe some board members. We didn't always, or your board members didn't always agree with each other. We had to work through things, right?
For sure.
So talk for a minute about, what do you do if you get new board members on, and the veteran board members are still there? The group dynamics change, but if they're divergent in the direction of where the board is trying to steer the organization or lead the organization, what do you do with rogue elected teammates?
Well, I was lucky when I was president that we didn't have full rogue.
Yeah.
And even in my 10 years, it wasn't too terribly bad. There were moments. You had much more difficult moments prior to the last 8 or 10 years that I was there, where you truly had rogue. What we did, you'd go into a final board vote, and it'd be a 5-0 vote, and people in the community would say, well, my gosh, it's rubber stamped. Well, it wasn't rubber stamped. It took a lot of pushing and shoving and teetering and tottering to get to that 5-0 vote.
That's right.
And so when you had that board member or one or two that didn't quite agree with what direction the majority was going, mm-hmm. or the superintendent wanted us to go, that was right for the district, we would communicate and over-communicate and over-explain And you were smart enough at the table before we at the study sessions to say, all right, let's pull back. Let's see if we can tweak it at his administrative end, tweak some of these things, and we'll bring it back to you. You read that. You were able to read that board very, very well, read your boards very, very well. And then we would tweak it. And then there might be some conversations where, hey, can you call this board member and say, what are your thoughts? What's your hesitations? And how do we get you from B to A?
Yeah.
And there was a process, and it worked. Now, prior to me, where you had a couple of real rogue board members who were not only trying to steer the direction in one, or steer the district in one direction, they were trying to dismantle the district in many ways. And I had a front row seat to that. That was a much more difficult push. And that's where you have to get community involved, and you really have to, hey, let's define what is right and what is wrong for the district. And we did a very good job of that. And past elections have proven we were on the right side.
Yeah. It's difficult when you have just polarizing positional politics. I know that not every state has term limits. Certainly Colorado does. And that's a blessing and a curse, right? I think, like your father, how many years did he serve on the school board before term limits?
Yeah, I think 14.
Yeah, right.
And then the ultimate term limit was that Mark Heiser beat him in an election.
Yeah.
So it's a true term limit.
Yeah, it is. The voters speak.
The voters speak.
The voters speak at the end of the day. But, by the time you learn stuff, I mean, your 4-year term is up, right? Because there's a lot to learn. And then by the time you're serving in your second term, it's almost like, okay, what's the legacy going to be by the time I step off here? Because it goes really fast, much more quickly than I think people realize.
I was lucky to have the 2 extra years, a year and a half extra, taking over from Mr. Landgraf.
Because you finished his term.
Because then I finally felt comfortable. But it's a good 2 years before you feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Before you know what to know.
Yeah. And I would say that's true even in a job.
Definitely.
Elections aside, just it takes a minute to get up to speed on things. As I know you've helped coach or you've spoken in front of groups of other board members. What's your best advice for people who are just stepping into a new leadership role? Because you've certainly been there on a number of fronts over time.
Yeah. And again, back to hindsight in those first 2 years or year and a half where I needed to learn to where I ended up 8 years later. Probably the most important thing is to don't think you know it all, because you certainly don't. And don't pretend you know it all. Certainly ask those questions and listen and learn. And then, what we did the best, and what I would recommend any new board member do, is make sure you hire the right people and put them in the right place to succeed. And in the end, they're going to make you look good as a board member. We did that in hiring you as superintendent and your successes, and you hired your team and their successes. And then they hired the principals and the teachers and their successes. You remember when I first got on, we were afraid to go to the voters for a bond or for a mill.
That's right.
Because we didn't have the trust of the voters.
That's right.
We didn't, because of what happened prior to us, where the former superintendent kind of misled the community in how to spend $100 and some million on some projects.
Right.
We didn't have the trust.
Right.
And it took a decade plus to build that trust where we could go to the voter. And I remember the first time we finally got one passed, we didn't know what to do. We were so excited. And then, right. And then here a month ago, we passed it 70-30. We have flipped because of your leadership, because of what happened in that 10 or 12 year period, we flipped a district. We communicated better, right?
Yeah, well, communication is so important.
Right. I mean, we made a point as a board and through you to invest in public relations.
Yep.
It's okay to spend some of that public money to communicate to your voters or to your residents your successes and your path. Here's our path forward. Here's what we want to do. Here's all of our successes. I don't think they did a good job of that 15 years ago. We did a great job of that in the last 8 years. I think they continue to do. It's okay to invest public money into that, in my opinion.
Yeah, you're really speaking about the court of public opinion now. And that's so important. I think leaders may not realize that even when you're doing something that could be exactly the right thing to do, if you don't have that messaging right, you can be, I think, misunderstood in a hurry. And so when you talk about trust, it takes a long time to build trust.
Yes, it does.
You can't cram for the harvest.
No.
But it takes a nanosecond, I think, for that trust to be destroyed if someone doesn't feel like you're acting with integrity. And I think you have to get used to living in that fishbowl a little bit. We're always on stage. You mentioned the grocery store, whether it's the grocery store or whether it's, you're just out to dinner. And if you always have to recognize that you're still that person.
You have that hat on.
You have that hat on. You're never going to take it off as long as you're in that role. And so how do you not do something that's going to end up on the front page of the New York Times the next morning, right? That's an important piece. When I talked about saints and survivors, you can be dead right. But then your cause is done.
Well, we're certainly survivors.
Yeah.
But again, when we erred, if there was an issue, we were on top of the issue. You and your team were on top of the issue immediately through communications.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, here's the problem. We fixed it. We recognize this happened. Here's what we did to fix it. And we move on. That we never lied to the community.
No.
We never, if they brought us an issue, a negative issue, you and your team tackled it immediately. It never became anything that would end up on the front page of the Denver Post.
Yeah, I think one thing that was important too is that the community knew if they brought something up, we wouldn't get angry at them, but we would try to tell them, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story that maybe they didn't know or understand.
Well, back to your question a few minutes ago about talk to me about what you may say to a new board member. That's one of those things you got to learn right away. That you hear someone, a resident, questions you about something going on in the community at the King Supers, and they're fired up, and they get you fired up, and then the board member goes home and calls the superintendent or sends off a lengthy email to the superintendent. Well, calm down. There's the rest of the story.
Right.
That we're not necessarily saying this resident is wrong, but there's more to the story. And 9 out of 10 times, for sure, there's more to the story. And that person who gave the initial complaint didn't know the whole story.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's almost like putting a puzzle together sometimes when you're putting all those pieces together. Classic example over and over again. I know I lived through, a parent would get upset about something and quite honestly, it could be very justifiable. But sometimes they would skip right over, the school leaders, right? And go directly to either the school board or go directly to my office. And my first question was always, have you spoken with the principal? Because I firmly believe, and I know you do too, the way we've worked together, issues get solved at the most local level.
Most definitely.
They don't get solved at the policy level, because I know you had to remind people a lot of times that you all set policy, but that you would make sure that we knew, and we would get back to the board and let them know the outcome of that particular situation. So the community sensing that you care, you truly care, and it's not just lip service, matters a whole lot. But it matters for those leaders too, to know that we have their backs, because they have difficult jobs.
Well, and you're right. 90% of the time, when you did kick it back to the principal or to that empowered the principal too. And that it really worked both ways. It told the leadership at the school that, my ultimate boss respects and expects me to solve this here. And I think that makes them feel pretty good.
Yeah, it's the way I would want to be treated as a leader, and have been. I mean, I had great leaders and mentors for me as well. Talk about your mentors for a second. I know you've had several mentors. You've mentioned a couple of them, and how important is that? Mr. Landgraf, of course, is one who was because he was my coach for forever too, and then that was nice. Then ultimately to take his spot in the board was a pretty big deal, but he was an excellent mentor. Dr. Mazzarotti, same thing, who I would have lunch with every Tuesday and would fill me in with all of his stories and accolades and such. But that's another one. Very, very important to have those. I always thought, my gosh, that Dr. Mazzarotti is one of the smartest persons I know. And that was before I served on the school board. And then he is one of the smartest persons I know. But then I got into the school district. My gosh, there was an awful lot of smart people. And a lot of things change.
Absolutely. A lot of people, we were so blessed to have some really smart people running that school district that got us through such a really difficult time. You don't know when you're on the clock and that kind of pressure, and that we were this close away to being District 14. That could have been us. And our leadership took us. We had a lot of smart people. We had a lot of smart leaders that led us in a different direction, that we didn't get to that we fought the state board, but we also handled things the right way internally, getting ourselves off the clock.
Well, and thinking about that, standardized testing that states do, or that is required from a Department of Education at the national level, or at the federal level rather, and at the state level. There are people who are in support of those things, and there are people who are not. It just so happened you came in at a time when, in order to turn around, I will call it a district that was low performing and, quite frankly, failing a lot of kids, something had to change systemically, and that's when the district went to competency-based education. It's amazing that we're still standing after that, because you mentioned Dr. Mazzarotti. He used to love to say, there are two things. If a Martian came down from Mars and looked around, he would recognize 100 years later the institutions of schools and churches. Mm-hmm. After that, everything else would be changed. So change, is sometimes very slow when you have large institutions that are a part of the fabric of America, I like to call it. Mm-hmm. And yet, systemically, we had to change or die. Talk about survivors, right? And we couldn't let a generation of kids lose out. No. And so that was another courageous move on the part of elected officials to work with the team, with me, with our district, with our unions, to take this district from point A to point Z. And I like to tell people, when the district came off of that accountability clock where, the district could have been shut down by the state, that was a really happy day with a lot of hard work that had gone into that.
Yes.
And guess what? They haven't been back on the clock since.
Right.
And even though we didn't play to standardized tests, we knew if we were doing the system justice with competency-based education and not leaving gaps with kids along the way, that they would be better off. And I believe you were in a pivotal role in terms of leadership to really academically save a generation of kids. And then we've already talked about the pandemic, but that was in there too. What a time. What a time to lead.
Yeah.
You can't make it up. Dr. Massaretti told me one time, he said, hey, I had a long tenure as a superintendent, but you have faced things I never had to face. And I tell people that,
not
in a
25.
decade, just in a decade.
And really, we did right by our kids. And we had some great partners. And we when we were worried about what the state board might do, we went to Cognia, right?
Yeah, it was entrustED at the time,
right?
Now Cognia, right?
And we teamed up with what is now
Dr. Marzano,
and Aurora Institute, right?
Yes.
We had some partners that if they didn't have our back right then, we knew if we needed them, they would.
Yeah, exactly. And I think they also saw and understood on the backside of that what we were attempting to do, and it was noble in its purpose.
We did right. We did right to our kids in the district for sure.
Yeah, a lot of help. Teachers matter.
100%.
Great teachers matter.
Another partner was our relationship with the union. We couldn't have got it. We timing was perfect for all of that. After some leadership change at WEA, we hit a good spot where we could move forward with the union without pulling teeth. Yeah.
And I think at the center of it all, people understood what we were really trying to do was to positively develop young people. This podcast is called the entrustED. And I think when you're in a leadership position, you've been given a large amount of trust. And it's very humbling.
Oh, yeah. It's scary.
It is scary. There's just a lot of responsibility, and you don't want to mess it up. But at the same time, you have to recognize you can't do it alone either. And so that's what you're talking about, is that power of partnerships.
Yeah, a lot of good partners, a lot of good teams.
And that synergy. Yeah. And it's a story that I think spans now about 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I was just on a call on Friday to talk about that. And that story will be coming out in 2025 as well, which will be
I can't wait to hear
fun. And I hope it helps people down the road when that book launches. So Ken, as you've reflected back, and I know we've talked a lot about what I call the 3 R's: relationships, because that's at the I think it's the cornerstone of anything in terms of building trust. What do you really think your legacy has been?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I can tell you that I remember when we were having a conference with the newly elected board members, and that question was asked, and what do you want your legacy to be? And I thought, well, it's not up for me to say. And then a year since, I don't know if I can answer that question completely, but I will say I'm really proud. I think I helped save Ranum, the building, and I think I helped save the Ranum name for the building, because there was some thought of it might be cheaper, better, easier to tear down the building and rebuild, and it might help us in terms of raising capital if we got rid of the Ranum name, something like that. And I think, looking at our election success, we did the right thing. We kept the Ranum family involved. We didn't stir up the community by wanting to tear down a building or change a name.
It's tough with pillars of the community.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And then to see since the year I've been gone, to see what the district has done at Ranham, and then not only how beautiful it looks and how wonderful it is inside, but the kids the students really throwing their arms around it and working and enjoying it. I think we made the right decision. And so in a little bit, that is a pretty good legacy.
Yeah, it is, because of course that's the facility and the programming now that's going to be feeding the workforce when kids leave the system, whether they go to a 4-year institution, a community college, or just have a credential where they can walk into the world of work. That's a big one.
We've done a great job, and the district has done a great job of promoting Ranham and its vision in the last year. I think they've done a great job.
You know, a shared vision is something that leaders often talk about. But I think over and over, it's coming back to some things you talked about earlier in the podcast here. And that's, you don't create a shared vision and then it just lives on a shelf somewhere. You're constantly bringing it back. You're constantly reminding yourself and everyone around you of what we're trying to do to keep things focused, and so that we're continuing to head in the right direction.
I agree.
So, well, I just appreciate you being with us today.
A lot of fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think you have been very humble in thinking about what your legacy impact really is, Ken, not just in a school district, but in the state of Colorado. I think in helping young people, whether it's been through your business in the past, whether it's keeping a community safe like you're doing right now with the local fire board. But I think what you've brought to our conversation today is politics. It really gets down to everything being local, doesn't it?
Right.
You know, right. It's about those pillars in the community and all the other things. And I so appreciate it. I really appreciate you being with us today, Ken. And your legacy is more far-reaching than I think you're giving yourself credit for. Your whole life has been devoted to public service. You've helped many, many young people in their own careers. You talked about mentors, and now here you are mentoring other people. It's come full circle, and we learn how to do something, and then we give it back and try to help somebody else. And I just appreciate you, and I appreciate you being here. And I appreciate all of you listening or watching today on the entrustED podcast. I hope you've been able to glean a little bit of knowledge and maybe some wisdom that you can put in your leadership toolbox to be used in the future. And like I always said to my team as we would hit the road, getting ready to do the hard and important work, rock on with your bad selves.